A silent crisis is unfolding across America, stretching from the coasts to the industrial heartlands. Billions of dollars in energy projects, the very projects designed to secure the nation's future, are quietly grinding to a halt, not because of activists, not because of market crashes, but because of self-inflicted wounds from a trade war. Imagine an industry racing to build the machines that will power tomorrow and suddenly loading its own backpack with rocks. Those rocks are tariffs. New taxes on the very materials needed to construct the backbone of American AGN. Energy have turned once viable projects into immovable giants. This is not a minor disruption. We're talking about a $50 billion standstill. That number is not just a statistic. It represents thousands of jobs frozen mid-construction, entire supply chains paralyzed, and a significant portion of the nation's energy output trapped in uncertainty. The sound of this industry grinding to a halt under the weight of its own government's policy is deafening. Projects become too expensive, not from a single blow, but from death by 1,000 cuts. Cost increases range from a manageable 4%. On some items, to catastrophic 40% spikes on the most critical components. At the heart of this collapse is oil country tubular goods. Massive, high-strength steel pipes that are the veins of every well. For decades, nearly half of these pipes were imported because the quality-to-price ratio made them the lifeblood of American drilling. Now, with a 40% tariff applied, the entire math collapses. It is like trying to buy a car and suddenly discovering that the engine and frame have doubled in cost. You cannot skip them. You cannot build the car without them, and for energy projects, this is catastrophic. When the steel skeleton, the electrical systems, and the machinery all inflate in costs simultaneously, the financial blueprint turns to dust. This is not simple inflation. This is a government-engineered disaster rendering the business of building American energy fundamentally broken. The story of American energy is often portrayed as rugged independence, but the reality is far more complex. The system had a single pressure point, a vulnerability silently exposed by these tariffs: steel.
Wow.
Not just any steel, but massive high-strength pipes used to line oil and gas wells. In 2024, roughly 40% of these critical pipes were imported. 2 out of every 5 pipes necessary to keep American drilling operational were coming from overseas. This was no accident. It was decades of calculated decisions, chasing cost efficiency and global optimization. The U.S. focused on high-tech drilling and extraction, relying on a global network for the raw physical components. This system worked perfectly until the rules of the game shifted overnight, revealing a vulnerability that had never been tested. The suppliers of this steel were part of a broader global transformation. While the West concentrated on finance and technology, a new industrial generation was rising in Asia. These nations invested billions to master large-scale precision manufacturing, building steel mills capable of producing higher quality materials faster and more cheaply than most competitors. American companies flocked to them because the value was undeniable. This was not a hostile takeover, but an organic evolution. These nations became indispensable pillars of the global industrial system, reshaping where the backbone of the modern world is forged. When the financial foundation of multi-billion-dollar energy projects collapses, chaos ensues behind the scenes. Lawyers and executives frantically search contracts for escape clauses, the legendary unforeseen event provisions that allow renegotiation when disaster strikes. Now, companies argue that tariffs are equivalent to an earthquake, an unforeseen catastrophe that renders previous agreements impossible to honor. The result is waves of frantic renegotiation, suppliers forced to absorb massive costs or watch contracts disintegrate. Legal stalemates freeze projects as surely as the tariffs themselves. But companies are not passive. They turn into global detectives, hunting high and low for alternative suppliers not subject to these punitive taxes. The scramble is relentless. A high-stakes treasure hunt across continents, each new supplier a lifeline to keep the lights on. The rigs turning and the energy flowing. Every delay is a reminder that the industry's fate is tethered to global forces beyond its control. That decades of strategic planning can be undone in a single policy stroke, and that billions of dollars, thousands of jobs, and the nation's energy independence are now hostage to trade negotiations. The cumulative effect is staggering. Projects meant to power the future are frozen. The workforce is destabilized, and the supply chains that once hummed like clockwork are fractured. Every contract, renegotiation, every alternative sourcing decision is a race against time, a fight to prevent the industry from collapsing under the weight of tariffs. The silence in the factories, the idle machinery, and the empty construction sites are the soundtrack of an American energy sector trapped in limbo. It is a crisis born not of natural disaster or foreign interference, but of policy, showing how delicate the balance of global supply chains has become. How dependent even a powerful nation like the United States is on the cooperation of global industrial partners. The ramifications extend far beyond the industry itself. Every frozen project affects the pace of renewable energy development, slows innovation, and jeopardizes national energy security. It is a stark illustration of how interconnected and fragile the modern energy ecosystem is, how policy missteps can ripple outward, halting progress, costing jobs, and threatening the very foundation of America's industrial and technological future. This is not a temporary hiccup. This is a structural paralysis, a cautionary tale of what happens when domestic ambitions clash with global economic realities, and when short-term political victories impose long-term costs on the nation's ability to power itself and lead the world in energy innovation. A silent crisis is rippling across America, from the coasts to the industrial heartlands. For billions of dollars in energy projects, the very projects meant to power the nation's future are quietly freezing, not because of environmental protests or market crashes, but because of self-inflicted wounds from a trade war. Imagine an industry racing to build the machines that will secure tomorrow, only to suddenly load its own backpack with rocks. Those rocks are tariffs, new taxes on the essential materials that form the backbone of American energy-making projects, so expensive that owners are forced to pause construction midstream. This is not a minor delay. It is a $50 billion standstill, a number that translates to thousands of jobs halted, supply chains fractured, and a massive portion of future energy output trapped in uncertainty. Projects have become too expensive, not from one giant blow, but from death by 1,000 cuts. Where cost increases range from 4% on some items to catastrophic 40% spikes on critical components. The lifeblood of drilling oil, country tubular goods, massive high-strength steel pipes is now at the center of the storm. For decades, nearly half of these pipes were imported because the quality-to-price ratio was unmatched. Now, with a 40% tariff, the financial blueprint collapses. It is as if the engine and frame of a car suddenly doubled in cost. You cannot skip them, you cannot build the car, and for energy projects, this is catastrophic. When the steel skeleton, the electrical systems, and the machinery all spike simultaneously, the business of building American energy becomes fundamentally broken. The myth of self-made energy independence collides with reality, exposing a pressure point no one foresaw: steel. In 2024, 2 out of every 5 essential pipes were coming from overseas. A decision made over decades to chase efficiency and global optimization, relying on international networks for raw materials while focusing domestic efforts on high-tech extraction. This system worked flawlessly until the rules changed overnight, exposing vulnerabilities buried deep beneath the surface. Asia had quietly transformed itself into a global industrial powerhouse, investing billions to master large-scale precision manufacturing, building steel mills capable of producing higher-quality materials faster and cheaper than most competitors. American companies flocked to them because the value was undeniable. This was not a hostile takeover. It was an organic evolution of global supply chains. These nations became pillars of the industrial system, reshaping where the physical backbone of the modern world is forged. When a multi-billion-dollar project's foundation collapses, chaos ensues. Lawyers and executives scramble for contract loopholes, the unforeseen event clauses that allow renegotiation when disaster strikes. Companies argue tariffs are earthquakes, events no one could anticipate, and renegotiate costs, with suppliers faced with either absorbing astronomical fees or watching deals vanish. projects freeze as legal deadlocks compound the financial disaster. Corporations embark on a frantic hunt for suppliers not subject to tariffs. A high-stakes global treasure hunt to keep projects alive. Orders are rerouted to Vietnam, Thailand, Mexico, and other nations in a desperate attempt to find back doors through the trade blockade. But the U.S. government is already moving to close these channels, labeling them tariff circumvention. Every new shipment is a gamble, every delay a certainty, and the only guarantee is rising costs. The obvious solution seems simple: build it all domestically. Made in America should solve everything. But the brutal reality is that building advanced large-scale steel mills capable of replacing 40% of the market takes years. Billions of dollars in a workforce whose specialized knowledge has been lost over decades. Capacity and expertise cannot be conjured overnight. This is a generational project. While Made in America sounds inspiring, it is a mirage for companies in crisis. A long-term dream unable to resolve immediate emergency. With their backs against the wall, energy companies are forced to innovate differently. If you cannot reduce material costs, you must use less of them. The crisis is triggering a silent technological revolution on the drilling floor. Companies are investing in artificial intelligence to find microscopic efficiencies, deploying robots for dangerous or repetitive tasks, and installing sensors that predict equipment failure before it occurs. Every saved dollar, every avoided delay, becomes a matter of survival. The pressure is creating a new kind of energy company leaner. More technologically advanced, ruthlessly efficient, not by choice, but by necessity. The ripple effects extend far beyond American borders. These frozen $50 billion projects are reshaping global trade. Orders are being pulled from traditional partners and shifted to new workshops in Asia and Latin America. The world's energy supply is a delicate balance. Where the United States has been the heavyweight champion of oil and gas production for the past decade, every new platform in the Gulf, every shale field in Texas, added weight to the American side, stabilizing global energy prices and granting leverage to consumer nations. Now, as projects stall, that weight lifts and influence swings back toward traditional energy giants. This is not just about prices at the pump. It is about diplomatic power. Countries with vast oil and gas reserves gain leverage in negotiations while American energy falters. Policy designed to bolster domestic industry now strengthens competitors in complex, unintended ways. In a hyper-connected world, every economic decision in Washington can rearrange the global chessboard. The age of effortless, hyper-efficient globalization is over. The new era demands resilience. The winning companies will not be those with the lowest cost, but those with diverse, trusted supplier networks spread across multiple regions to absorb shocks. Agility has become the new currency. Success will go to those who anticipate policy shifts, pivot supply chains instantly, and embrace uncertainty as a permanent condition. Those who thrive will not necessarily be the largest or richest in the old system, but the smartest, most adaptable, and most technologically capable. The final chapter of this transformation is still being written, and its consequences will define the future of American energy. Global trade and the balance of power on a scale unseen in decades. This is a story of tariffs, trade wars, and $50 billion in frozen projects. But it is also the story of adaptation, innovation, and survival under extraordinary pressure, proving that in the modern world, resilience, ingenuity, and speed can become more valuable than raw power.